Welcome everybody to our first webinar on Path to Agility Navigator. We're excited to share with y'all what we've been working on for almost the past year, I guess, is when we first kind of said, hey, let's go do this thing. And we've been testing it internally and using it with clients, and some of our facilitators have been using it. And so last month was our official kind of launch of Path to Agility Navigator. So today, what we've got planned is Seth and I are going to walk through a little bit of why Path to Agility Navigator, what problem is it trying to solve in the market today. I'm going to do a little bit of a high-level Path to Agility overview, just in case people are, some of you are not familiar with the approach, but then we'll give you a link for more detail information on that. And then Seth's going to walk us through a demo of the actual software and features, and then we'll do Q&A. So it should be about 30 minutes of prepared content, and then plenty of time for questions. For those that in your Zoom, you should see a Q&A button and that's the best place for questions instead of using the chat for questions. So pop questions in there. That gives us the ability to triage those, and we'll get to as many as we can given the time that we have available. So for those that don't know, I'm David Hawks, with CEO of a company called Agile Velocity. And my focus over the last 12 years has been at the Agile transformation space. We created this thing called Path to Agility as an approach to transformation. And now we've launched the Path to Agility organization to build Path to Agility Navigator. And I will turn it over to Seth to introduce himself and kind of kick us off into what is Navigator.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. So my name's Seth Ely, and I'm the product manager for the Path to Agility. And I've been working on bringing this product to market over the last several months. I've brought a lot of interesting products and worked with teams to do different products over the years, but this is one that I'm particularly excited about sharing with you today. So one of the first things that we really want to talk about in regards to the Path to Agility Navigator is some of those challenges that we were seeing that drove us in the direction of wanting to create a product. So some of the things that we've noticed are in the course of a transformation, especially as it moves from those initial successes to the point where it needs to scale, is that suffering from inconsistent approach. It doesn't happen right away because consistency becomes a concern when there's more than one thing happening. But as that scaling starts to happen, that consistency becomes a common issue, and it starts to show up. In addition, the absence of accountability. So in talking with a lot of leaders and transformation experts and coaches and things of that nature, one of the things we've noticed is Agile centers of excellence don't always have the mechanism to drive actions. Even if they can identify them, they don't always happen. So having the accountability for the action, which is also tied into the next one, which is visibility, making sure that the correct actions happen, but that it's also something that can be seen. So another thing that we've noticed is sometimes coaching, training, assessments, metrics, transformation backlogs, those are all there, but they aren't connected in a way that makes it easy to see and understand how they can work together to really make a transformation effort efficient. And then outcomes. So the whole thesis of Path to Agility is that at the end of the day, what matters most is the impact that the transformation efforts have on your actual business. So we cannot just throw training at the problem, or we cannot just do assessments and focus on all the areas where we didn't assess well. We need a mechanism that focuses our efforts in the right direction. So what we're seeing at the union of all these things is really a need for that ongoing transformation journey to be successful. It has to be actively managed. And that is why we created Path to Agility Navigator. So I'm going to talk about next the foundation of the Path to Agility transformation process. On top of that, we built a platform that's geared towards driving continuous improvement. And that's what we mean when we talk about transformation management and a platform to do that. So this diagram has a number of different slices. And the first one that I want to drill in on is evaluate, which is where we would do the Path to Agility assessment. Now, when we talk about assessments, there's a lot of competing assessments out there that assess a variety of different things. But we look at assessment a little bit differently. I think we've all been assessed before. We brought home a report card with a bad grade. And the tendency is always to focus in on the bad grade, right? Like, what's the lowest grade you have? That's the thing we need to focus on. But with the Path to Agility, it gives us the ability to assess in a lot of different areas, but then focus our efforts on the areas that actually make sense based on the business outcomes that are important and the way that the phases and stages of a transformation come together. And that allows us to do targeted assessment as this process continues. But based on initial assessments, we can visualize using the Path to Agility map where all the pieces and parts of a transformation fit and how we're doing with progressing in those areas. Then we can drill down in this analyze part of the wheel slice into both the content of the Path to Agility and the information from an assessment perspective that sits underneath that. And we can use that to then prioritize. So forming a transformation backlog that's built on both the knowledge of where we sit, but also how the pieces and parts of a transformation fit together to decide what actions to take. And then a visible way of viewing those actions and driving them to completion in the act slice. And you can kind of see in the middle, this yellow area is really depicting the visibility and communication that's needed to have all those pieces tie together. But if we really take those accountable actions that we need to take, in theory, it should progress us in a way that we can evaluate the areas that we prioritized and the areas that we're taking action and expect to see progress there. And that's when we can get away from survey fatigue and just endlessly assessing things and get to this process that drives us down into the areas of priority and really focusing on understanding progress in those areas. So just to sum up real quick, and then we'll peel back the Path to Agility a little bit more. Path to Agility Navigator provides a single source of truth. It provides a way of visualizing progress that's great for communicating and telling the story with leaders and with teams. And it shows a clear relationship between activities and results so that these things aren't disconnected. Every piece and part of what's happening is connected. And then also real-time views into what the next steps should be. So you'll notice that I referenced the Path to Agility assessments, Path to Agility map, some of these things that are part of the core of Path to Agility that's existed for some time. So I'm going to turn it back over to David to describe some about the Path to Agility. And then after that, we'll take a look inside the software itself.
Yeah, recognizing that we've got a mixture of audience here of some folks that I can see some of our Path to Agility practitioners and facilitators who are already familiar with Path to Agility on the call, but we also have some new folks and who may not be as familiar. So I'm going to do just a quick kind of overview, and then we'll send you a link to the 30-minute webinar that's just all about Path to Agility as well, if you want to dig more into that content. So at a high level, we think about a transformation in these 5 core stages that you see here. We've got kind of our standard change curve mapped out in yellow, but the idea being that one of the first things we need to do in a transformation is align around the why, the compelling reason for change, making sure that's being communicated, making sure we're aligning everybody and kind of motivating people to take action and want to take action. Learn is all about creating a learning culture. So not just like go to training, but are we figuring out how to improve the system of work and how we're approaching things? Are we removing impediments? Are we having meaningful retros? then that leads to a stage of what we call predictability. And we talk about predictability before speed or acceleration, because if we're not very predictable and we say go faster, like we actually add more noise to the system. So getting predictable is about reducing complexity, reducing the volatility of the work that we're doing, or the flow of work. And then we can start to optimize the whole and accelerate, and then ultimately get to an adaptable stage, which is about adapting based on what the market is kind of dictating, so that we can sense and respond, test and learn quickly with the market. So if learn is really about learning kind of how we work in our system, adapt is really learning more from a product or market perspective. But we can't test and learn and run small experiments and adapt if we don't have the ability to deliver quickly, and we can't get the deliver quickly if we just have this kind of volatility. And then that builds on the learning culture, and that builds on a line. So we've got these 5 stages, and then we also have what we call the 3 levels of Path to Agility. And Path to Agility looks at a transformation at not only the team level, where a lot of our work is getting done, but we also need to look at the system level, or what we call the system of value delivery, the flow of work through the system, or the team of teams level, right? Most of our organizations are large, and therefore it requires more than a single team to get products out the door. And so we need to look at our scale. So here's where like safe practices and other things come into play. Path to Agility is not a replacement for Scrum or Safe or Less or Kanban. Path to Agility is a lens that you can apply, kind of an umbrella, if you will, across all of these Agile practices that we might employ, and give us a way of making sense of kind of where we are and identifying next steps that we need to take. So we might apply Scrum practices at the team level. Safe has a lot of answers on how we coordinate work across the system, but we also need to think about the organization as a whole. Things like this is where kind of our organizational structure could impact our HR practices, our finance practices, our leadership dynamic, our strategy, things like that at an organizational level. So we look at all 3 of these kind of levels as a lens, and ultimately what we built is a capability model that you see in what we call the Path to Agility map. And in the Path to Agility map, what you see here are the 26 Agile outcomes that we've mapped out across those 5 stages, across those 3 levels, to provide, again, guidance for a transformation. And Seth's going to show you how we can use Path to Agility Navigator here in a second to assess where we are, get a heat map of where we are, start to gain intelligence of where we are. And then that starts to inform, based on the outcomes that we're after, what are the things that we need to do. All of these 26 Agile outcomes breaks down into more detailed, what we call Agile capabilities. There's over 85 Agile capabilities in the capability model. And in that, again, is another level of depth for a organization to be able to kind of evaluate where you are, and analyze and start to figure out, okay, what are the actions that we want to take in order to progress in our pursuit of agility. So I'm going to turn it back over to Seth. Again, we're going to post a link in the chat to a longer webinar, and we'll send that also as a follow-up email. That's a 30 minutes kind of in-depth view into Path to Agility, so that if you want to get more information on that, you can. But Seth, I think everybody's here to see some new software product that you've maybe been working on. And so I'll turn it back over to Seth.
Great. So let's just jump right into the software at this point. So you can see that the screen barely changed in terms of how it looks, because one of the views that is really the hub within Navigator is the map view. But I'll give you some context that, there's some additional things above it. But this map view, because it's software instead of just being a PowerPoint presentation, is interactive. So there's a lot more capabilities that we have to work with this inside of the software. So I actually have the capability to go into any of these agile outcomes that David was talking about and split it out into its component parts. So I can see the agile capabilities that make it up, the descriptions, the acceptance criteria. And so I can explore the depth of the Path to Agility framework through those mechanisms. But I also have the ability to add things to this map view. So one of the ways that I'd get started in actually using it, and one of the things we do within Path to Agility early on in a transformation, is a leadership workshop that focuses on selecting business outcomes that are of most importance as part of the Agile transformation, so that it keeps it in mind that outcome focus is really the most important part of the transformation. What do we get from it from a business perspective? So assuming that that happens and we've identified those can be selected, and then they become an overlay onto this map view. And by clicking on these, I can now filter the map view below, and I see certain agile outcomes are highlighted. And those agile outcomes that are highlighted are ones that are most correlated with getting that business outcome. I can also select more than one to get sort of a collective list of important agile outcomes. So this starts to give me a sense of prioritization and builds a sort of a customized view. Not every transformation is the same. They don't all have the same goals. It's not the same industries, same markets. There's differences, but this starts to target this map to the unique path to agility for an individual organization. But there's some more things that we can do even early on to begin to use this map view to tailor the priorities and start to drive towards action as the transformation gets kicked off. And so one of the other things I can do from this view is to launch an agile outcome poll. So an agile outcome poll, if I launch it, and in this case, I've set it up to just poll for the first 3 stages, but it allows facilitation in a planning poker style of working with the leaders to determine a baseline for those agile outcomes. So we've already done some things to tell us which ones are most important, but we don't have a sense of whatever progress we might have made or how we're currently doing. And that's another important component to really planning out that initial transformation backlog. So going through this, we would be able to add participants, open voting, allow that voting to happen, and then drive towards consensus or near consensus. And then the system will allow you to pick a score. And we have a 5-point scale from not met to fully met. So what we're really looking at is what is the completeness of the statement here? How far has our progress been towards achieving what's stated? So in this case, maybe this is partially met. And we can continue working through these, open the voting, depending on the votes. And we have 1 participant in. So, whatever their vote is, just kind of gets populated as a recommended vote. But we can continue to move through this and very quickly start to get some data about the current state of agility within the organization. And so once some of those scores are input, at any point you can end the poll and it will take you back to the map view. But now you can see that it's started to change and it has some colors. So actually up above here, there's a scale that correlates with those colors. And so we can start to see what the progress looks like from that perspective. And we also see percentages of completeness down at the bottom right here. But I can also still overlay these business outcomes. So now I have a really good sense of things where progress has been made and also how they tie into business outcomes, which allows me to do some initial outcome level prioritization. So I have the ability to go into one of these and say, okay, action enabled is really important right now. I'm going to click prioritize. And what that does is it starts to build a list of prioritized agile outcomes, but it also shows up on the map as number 1. So now I visually can see the highlight around business outcome, our current baseline of progress, and I have a view into priority. And that really starts to paint a picture of where that focus should be. And really, at the end of the day, I think our hypothesis is that the real utility of assessment is around driving towards what areas to focus in. And in order to do that, you need, in addition to the assessment, you need to have this map so that you know where those pieces and parts fit. Because if I was red on, whole org agility on the first day, that actually makes sense. It doesn't mean that whole org agility and the things associated with that is what I'm going to jump into. I'm still trying to work from left to right and do things in these stages based on the way that the dependency chain is sort of set up and the way that the critical path that's painted through this image. So now that I've started to kind of do that initial leadership level stuff, I'm going to jump into what it would look like if we were in the middle of a more active transformation where more of these activities have been going on for a period of time. And this is based on semi-realistic data from real engagements where we've been using this. So this picture is pretty accurate as to what you might see as an engagement moves along. So one of the first things that I want to point out is that there's a trend line that you can see. So for compelling purpose, I see that it's green, it's at 83%, and I can see it started off pretty low, and I can see the trend of how it's transitioned through the course of the effort that has happened with the transformation. So that gives me some additional context. I also have the ability to look at all the assessments that sit behind this map that assess down to the capability level. And I have a list of those, and I can click on ones that are from the past, and it actually takes the map back to that point in time. So I can see there's a lot of red and orange in this top left corner on the first day of the transformation. And as those efforts happen, we start to see green, and some of the red is being taken over by yellow and orange until we get to today. So I can see the progress and not only just the current state and correlate those things. And I'm going to give you an example of why that's really important and compare it to just assessing in a vacuum. So I'm going to go ahead and check our business outcomes again. We have the ability to continue to do that as we move through the transformation. And I want to point out that on this map, I can see team empowerment is number one for priorities, and ability to measure is number two. If we kind of zoom in and look at this, we can see that there's some differences. They're both at 50%. So if I was just doing an assessment in a vacuum, I have no additional context about which one to focus on, whether there's impediments that are keeping it at that stage, whether it's where it should be, whether it's prioritized. I just know what the score is. But for this, I can see that team empowerment has actually made a lot of improvement to get to that 50%. However, ability to measure is completely flatlined from the beginning of the transformation to now, even though it is one of the items that's prioritized. And so that is a source of curiosity. But because this software ties to a lot of that underlying data, it allows me to explore it further. So I can open ability to measure and notice that there's a capability that's trailing the other capabilities. And I can also drill in and see that there are action items associated with this. So there's the ability to add work items in the system to address issues. And I've uncovered one of those. And in this case, if I hover over this, I see that it's blocked. And if I open it, I see there's notes that tell me that there's a impediment, essentially that there's a budgetary issue that's preventing a tool that needs to be procured in order for this one to move forward. So now when I look back at the map, it's telling a much broader story. But one thing that I also noticed is that there's this little icon. And if I hover over it, it says there are tools that need to be procured in order for this to move forward. So how did that get there? Well, if I'm a coach, I have the ability to go in and actually add context to the map, because one of the really powerful things about a visualization is the ability to tell a story. And we want to be able to succinctly tell a story to an executive. I had someone use the phrase, the coloring book version this morning. Like, we want to simplify and really be able to deliver a succinct message about what's happening that's easy to consume for different audiences. And so this allows us to use this for storytelling and really say, here's the reason why this is flat. And so we can see a lot more context about this than just an assessment in isolation. We can see where it sits within the stages. We can see what the priority is. We can see what the trend is, and we can see that context that's added by actions and activities, and also through coaching. In addition, just as part of working through the transformation backlog, we have the ability to go into any capability that we'd like and begin adding work items. So here's a list of work items, and we can continue to add those from the map, and they'll be automatically associated with that Agile capability as we build out that list. But that list also exists in a format that would allow an easy way to work through them. So coming in to the work item view, looking at items that are assigned to you, or focusing in on particular Agile capabilities that are a priority or that are of focus. So in this way, this sort of view can be used to help drive Agile leadership team meetings and make sure that the most important items are being worked on, and then it's tied back to the progress that we're evaluating and giving status on. All right, and then we also can look at the underlying assessments. And so I'll drill into one of those. And within these underlying assessments, we have the org, system, and team stage, or level, I'm sorry. And we have the ability to add a hierarchy that has numerous systems that are made up of many teams, and each of those is a node sort of within this hierarchy that you can select and then add scores for those individual teams. And so it actually breaks down into that capability level data. So roles fulfilled as a capability that rolls up to team formed, but then that's also associated to a team, and then that all shows up back on the map. So if we return to the map view, and I go down to the bottom here, I can see those teams also appear here, and I can split those back apart and see their relative progress, and notice that this email team has made a lot of progress on quality feedback loop shortened, and the web team is still flatlined in that. So comparing the teams to give context to these roll-up scores as well. And then one of the other features, real quick, is the ability to just traverse the progress. So that same hierarchy, we can move through it, look at the scores, and they show up as Harvey balls that correspond to, like, this one that has nothing is not met, this is fully met. And we can click on any of those and change the score on the current assessment from there. So it gives us another way to navigate that underlying information. That's essentially the features and functionality that map back to the wheel that we were talking about earlier. So we have the ability to do the assessments, visualize them, drill down and view the progress, prioritize, and then create actions. And then as those actions complete, then this also is updated as we continue to assess and evaluate in those areas. And so that's essentially Path to Agility Navigator.
All right, let me get back. I've been triaging some things as we go, and I was just multitasking and I wrote the wrong email. You stuck on I put info at Agile Velocity instead of info at Path to Agility. Okay, so we've got some good questions that are coming in. Again, feel free to add others as you are seeing them, and I'm seeing some good comments. Bob and Craig both had kind of a related question, which was kind of like, all right, who would be doing this, and kind of what the level of effort required for our coaches to kind of do the activities. So Seth, if you can kind of maybe go back to the map view, I can kind of talk about like what the typical facilitation approach often is. So a lot of times what we see coaches or change leaders kind of do with this is the first activity that you'll want to do is a discussion around those 9 business outcomes. And so taking something like this and having a conversation around what's the why behind why we're doing this, and trying to get some alignment behind that. and so that, you could be doing in Miro or dot voting, or, soon there'll be some built-in polling, as you saw here around this as well. But ultimately, and that could just be a conversation or polling in Zoom, type of thing. So that's the first conversation we encourage you to have. After that, then becomes so the level of effort of, all right, facilitating a session with a group of people who have a lens from an organizational kind of lens. And that could be done with an ALT, what we call like an Agile leadership team, or which is like your change team. Craig, you mentioned it could also be maybe a LACE, like who's empowered in your organization, who's kind of taking ownership of your transformation, that would benefit from, we find that there's two benefits of doing the activity of just trying to create like this high level heat map. And one benefit is of course the data of where we are. But the other benefit is getting the leaders to kind of understand the journey they're on. And so participating and reading the descriptions and making a choice helps people realize, oh, we've got a lot of work we have to do in the transformation at a team level, a system level, and organizational level. So we're also creating awareness by doing that level of assessment. And so that could be done in a 30 to 60 minute kind of facilitated session, just to get the high level Agile outcome like this, just to get this. And a lot often the first time we do it, we might not do all 5 stages. We might just do, hey, let's just focus on align, learn, predict. And as Seth's showing here, we might narrow that so that we can get it done in an hour. And then, that would kick off the polling and doing that, that integration within the tool here. What is the heavier level of assessment, as Seth showed, when you get down to that capability level, which is, in this view, that can be more in depth. And at that point, you might be doing each team doing their own capability level assessment. So if you had 10 Agile teams, you might be doing a session with each of them, so each of the teams can get awareness. Each of the teams can come up with an action plan or an improvement plan. But typically the system and organizational level is done by that kind of Agile leadership team or LACE to do that level of assessment. These can take a little bit longer because we're getting into more details. But the intention is you kind of do that once and you create that baseline. And then over time, you're just kind of updating as you go, as we're making improvements. Hey, we made improvements here. Let's look at which capabilities have changed. And we're just maybe changing every couple weeks. So it's so as you mentioned, kind of, Bob, there's definitely can be more work up front for that bigger baseline, capability-based baseline. That could be, again, if you're doing it with every team, there definitely could be hours of investment there. But the goal is you're not having to every quarter spend hours, right? You're just kind of updating that as you go. And that connects to Craig, your last question there about the frequency of assessments. We've seen people that are doing assessments quarterly. We've seen people do assessments monthly. But again, the goal is less about doing big, heavy assessment the longer you go, the heavier it's going to be. But instead of it being every month we're going through and asking 85 questions again, our goal would be, as you finish work items, as you're making improvements, then each of those work items, I don't know if you can click in one there, Seth, on one of those work items. And like this one's connected to the capability of urgency created. So as we finish this, then it would trigger us to say, hey, let's go update urgency created. We originally assessed that as not met. We've now done some work. what do we think it is now? And we could just do that, one capability at a time. And then that just becomes continuous as opposed to being a kind of a frequency of deep assessment. Our goal, we kind of see it as more continuous assessment as opposed to big, heavy lifts every time. All right. I think I've answered the questions in Q&A. Let's see. Any other questions? Yeah, so Bob, your question of, can we see with continuous assessment, can we see the way to see the deltas? And so maybe Seth, you could show again how we can see kind of looking at one assessment to the next. So I guess we don't really have a view that's like, here's exactly these 5 things changed, but on the map, you do have the ability to toggle between 2 assessments. That's an interesting thought, Bob. Seth, I don't know if you've thought about that or what your thoughts are on the ability to highlight between these 2 things. These are the 5 places that changed. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. One of the things that we did in terms of building out these visualizations was looked at ways before this existed that individuals tried to visualize these things. And so the trend line is one aspect, being able to look at past ones is another aspect, but arrows that are up or down, like which thing went up or down from the last time at a deeper level, is another thing that we've seen. And it makes a lot of sense because the score itself could be reflective of one thing going down and another thing going up. And so at that level.
Yeah. Okay. There were a couple other questions that I just answered in the Q&A, which were, are the work items manually added? Yes, today, like all the work items you see are something that somebody triggered based on the information and created. We have talked about some templating around like a starter set, if you will. So that's in the backlog, but that's not there today. There was also a question about Jira and ADO integration, which is there is not integration currently, but that is definitely something we've talked about today. The thought being, I might track my high level kind of work item here. I might link to something, just pasting a link to the tool where I might have more specific task level in the tool, but there's value again in that full circle tracking things in here so that I can see when, hey, I made this change and how that's impacting. And I think I see, Bob's last comment there of like, yeah, we're working towards that ability of being able to say, hey, we did these things that led to this change, right? And if we lose that visibility into Jira and ADO, we're not able to make as much of that correlation. So we're trying to find the right balance for that. And
yeah, and another thing that we've noticed is a lot of times, at least initially, those agile leadership team level resources aren't necessarily integrated as much into Jira and ADO within those organizations. And so that's not a way they're already managing work in some cases. And so this is a easy way to get started that's connected to everything else.
So did you show the Kanban?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, because yeah, I think again, just trying to get that high level visualization that either an ALT could manage, hey, here's what's changing, even being able to start surfacing, hey, team 1 has this improvement item, team 2 has this improvement item, are things that we're working towards so that we can start to see that and also start to see impediments across teams. I don't know if you showed on the map the like drill down to teams, like that expansion.
Yep.
yeah, ability there. Sorry, I was triaging questions probably. Okay. Any other questions? I think we've answered. Oh, no, while I was off on another tab. Okay, a couple more questions coming in. Let's see. Let's see, in the tool, when you manually change something as you update it, when you move the needle on some of the Agile outcomes, what happens when you do the assessment again? Does it start with the last score you entered, or does it default back to 0% for each assessment? You want to take that one, Seth?
Yeah, so you can make that choice. So when I start a new assessment, there's a checkbox that says populate this with data from a past assessment. So I can have the last assessment form that baseline and create it, and it will pull forward everything. Or I can say, we want a blank slate. We're doing it with a different approach, different group of individuals. There's some reason we're just saying we just want to make sure everything's valid and that we've reassessed everything. Then I could uncheck that and just create it with everything blank.
Yeah, cool. And then see another question, which is how do we expect data collected from this tool to influence the BO to AO to capability connections? So yeah, so there's definitely, as we continue to gather more and more data and use in this product, right, that's just going to help us reinforce the correlations and be able to show, one of the items Seth and I've talked about is like critical path of like, all right, say we want faster time to value, the ability to click on that and see that chain that leads to that. And so the more data that we're able to start gathering, some months down the road, we'll be able to start being able to show a lot more of that correlation. And then I'm also interested if we'll be able to see correlation, say within a large transformation, how that compares to the whole populace, or are there different correlations that are showing up within, a single organization? So definitely things to come, right, as we get more and more data in the product. So Anna asked a question about companies already in the middle of a transformation, using different tools or different things from an assessment perspective. How do we convince people to use this tool? What we find, is that a lot of transformations. So first part of that question, I'm already in a transformation. Is this going to disrupt? And what we find is that most transformations are just missing a lens to be able to see, like, well, where are we, right? Like, we're in our transformation. Are we actually getting an improvement? Are we actually focused on the right things? This can be a lens for any, most companies are not starting a transformation from scratch. Most companies are somewhere in an agile transformation or have been for years. So this is something that can, again, be an overlay to help you see, all right, how do all these things connect from what we're doing from a people perspective, from what we're trying to do from an OKR perspective, from what we're trying to do from a safe perspective, from what we're trying to do from a DevOps perspective. How do we connect a lens for all of that so that we can see that we're taking the right actions, that we're actually making, and seeing improvements in the right areas. So I get that it can be now another expense or another tool. And so that's something that we're, conscious of, but we feel like nobody else is combining all of those things into one view. And that's what we're trying to create here. So hopefully there's value seen in doing that. And then we got one more question, which is, let's see, what about any ability to add related but not P2A specific outcomes and actions across any levels? So yeah, I would go to the same place. So it's not that, we don't have the ability today to customize the outcomes and the capabilities. However, Seth, what do you got here as part of your answer?
So when you add the work items from the map, you're doing it in the context of the P2A approach and that P2A content. But if you just want to add an action directly, it's not required that you associate it back into the Path to Agility approach. So you can create things on here that that don't correlate with that. And then also, we've talked about in the future what extending would look like in what areas, and that's one thing that we're experimenting with, like what level of customization. We don't want to over architect it for customization, but we want to understand the areas where that makes the most sense, and the way to do that while sort of maintaining the integrity of what's there as well.
Yep. All right. Let's see. From Anonymous, assuming the data gathered here will stay in the cloud, what enterprise level permissions are needed? Has that been considered as an impediment?
So yeah, we've done, I mean, you work through procurement process with several early customers to be able to go through that process. There's a number of questions that we have to answer, and we also have agreements that cover the usage of data. And as we continue to roll through that, I mean, things that we see as an impediment, where it's like, okay, we need to be to meet one set of security requirements, sales driven perspective. There's changes we may need to make, but as it's gone so far, we've been able to answer those and move through that process just based on the way we're doing it. There's like the shared accountability model in using cloud service providers and stuff really helps accelerate that compared to homegrown solutions that you were hosting yourself traditionally and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a hoop to jump, to jump through. Luckily for transformation, rarely are we gathering, highly sensitive data of any sort. But it definitely is still something that is part of the process that we got to go through. All right, anything else? Let's see, I'm trying to interpret this question. There was a basic, it's just a recommendation, a feature. Yeah, definitely, Bob. We're been talking about kind of the ways to extend. We've seen it even when we had the physical cards, that sometimes people would scratch something out, add something else, and so we definitely on the backlog. All right, I see someone has their hand raised, but I don't think you're allowed to talk in webinar mode, so I'm not sure how to allow you to do that, but if you can ask a question in the Q&A, we can answer it there. Otherwise, I'm going to give us 30 seconds if there's any more questions. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up. If you're interested in learning more, I think you had a slide that was just kind of just reach out to us at info@pathtoagility.com. You can learn more. There's more content around Navigator on the pathtoagility.com website. And if you're somebody put a question in there about facilitator or practitioner. If you're a facilitator or P2A practitioner, you can get access to the product. So just email us at info@pathtoagility and we can hook you up. And we'd be happy to do a demo with more of your team and answer more specific questions for your environment if that is interesting to you. So thanks a lot for attending today. And we're excited to share with you this great new product that we've built. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.